Hello, my fellow weirdlings. It's Margot. Today I'm exploring some African American folktales and urban legends that are guaranteed to haunt your nightmares. So if you're ready to get spooked and spine tingled, keep watching. The Black community has never had adequate representation in the horror community, though they've contributed greatly to the genre. Black people have never been strangers to creepy folktales and ghost stories from way back, some of which have crept into the public consciousness and our deepest fears, far more than we probably even realize. So I want to touch on a few of those terrifying monsters, and maybe open your eyes to some Black history that's too often overlooked in the horror and paranormal communities. I've paraphrased this one. There once was an old witch woman named Old Betty who lived in the woods. She was ugly but helpful and was happy to fix all sorts of problems if asked nicely. But for all of her helpfulness, Old Betty had just one friend, a fat old razorback hog named Rawhead. One day, a hunter stole Rawhead from Old Betty's yard and slaughtered him. Old Betty couldn't let that stand, so she pulled out her book of spells and did what she had to do to get her friend back. The spell was a success. Rawhead returned to Old Betty from beyond the grave, but he was noticeably changed. He had bloody, bare-clawed hands and a raccoon tail. He now walked on 2 feet. His skeleton was a bloody mess of flesh and bones, muscle, and sinew. He seemed to be patchworked together from random parts of various animal species. The most awful change of all was that he was now in the habit of carrying around his own severed piggy head. But none of this was a deal-breaker for Old Betty. She welcomed Rawhead back into her life and her home, and together they set about seeking revenge. Though this story originated in 1500s England, Rawhead eventually became one of the most feared boogeymen of the American South, where he and his sidekick Bloody Bones were often invoked to scare the crap out of kids and adults alike. It's a classic Haints story. So that brings us to our first fearsome creature of Black American folklore. A Haint is a type of ghost or evil spirit believed to be sent to cause mayhem or death. They're commonly thought of as spirits of the dead who are angry and easily agitated. According to Wikipedia, the word Haint is an alternative spelling of haunt, which was historically used in African American vernacular to refer to a ghost, or in the hoodoo belief, a witch-like creature seeking to chase victims to their death by exhaustion. Appalachian historian Dave Tabler adds that the word haint can also refer to an indefinable something that scares the bejeebers out of you. Some descriptions also claim that haints come to steal naughty children. Haints originated in the beliefs and customs of the Gullah Geechee people, who are the descendants of African slaves. They now live predominantly in the Low Country and on the barrier islands off the coast of the Carolinas, Georgia, and northern Florida. The lore varies from region to region of the southern U.S. The Gullah people came from different parts of Africa and spoke many different languages, which eventually merged with the English of their captors to form a type of Creole dialect. Similarly, the stories of the Gullah people melded with those of their captors, forming folklore like the story of Old Betty and Rawhead. While white Southerners began telling stories from Africa, African slaves and their descendants also picked up stories from England, adding their own unique details along the way. For instance, a lot of people somehow still don't realize the well-known classic stories of Brer Rabbit originated in African folklore and arrived in America on slave ships. Author Felder Rushing says the word haint is actually derived from early European roots, from the French verb hanter, meaning to stalk or inhabit. He dates the word to about 1330. He says the African American word haint, used as a noun, was first recorded in 1843. Other sources claim the word actually originated from the Welsh word haint, meaning infection, plague, or pestilence. Regardless of how the word haint originated, it's now a completely separate word with its own distinct meaning and usage. It's even got its own signature color. More on that in a second. According to legend, haints can enter a home through any opening: open windows, doors, small holes, cracks, or keyholes. Once they're in, you seem to be kinda screwed, so it's best to focus on keeping them out. Thankfully, haints seem to be easily distracted. Pasting newspapers onto walls like wallpaper will make them feel compelled to read every word, and therefore they'll momentarily forget about doing their evil deeds. Similarly, you can leave out a bowl of rice or sand, and the haint will be kept busy counting every grain, or you can distract them with counting the straw on brooms or bristles on brushes. There's also a way to trap a haint by setting out a bottle tree. Perhaps you've seen those before and assumed they were just yard decorations, trees with colorful glass bottles placed on their branches. They can actually be quite pretty. For the purpose of haint trapping, blue bottles are preferred. Bottle trees are said to trap the spirit of the haint inside the bottles and hold it there until daylight comes. Some legends claim a haint's a spirit traveling outside of its skin and must be back inside the skin before sunrise or it's destroyed. But the most common way to ward off or trick a haint is by using a special shade of paint called haint blue. If you spent any time in the South, you've probably seen it. Haint blue is a special shade of light or Caribbean blue said to ward evil away and protect from bad spirits. It's used to paint porch ceilings, shutters, window frames, and doors. It was believed that haints would mistake the blue ceiling or doors or windows for water, which they're unable to cross, and get too discombobulated to find their way into the home. Later, it was also widely believed that the color would discourage wasps from building their nests in the ceiling of the porch because they'd mistake it for open sky. Though nowadays it's believed the reason the paint may have repelled insects, if it ever actually did, was because some formulations contained lye. The practice of using haint blue paint began among the Gullah people in the 19th century, spreading throughout the South. Eventually, white Southerners found it attractive, and it became a trendy design choice. It actually still is today. Once there were two men who'd been friends all their lives. They married two beautiful women at around the same time, and everything seemed fine. Then one day, one of the men asked the other, "When you wake up at night, is your wife in bed with you?" "She sure is," his friend answered. "Why do you ask?" "When I lie down in bed at night, my wife is with me, but when I wake up in the middle of the night, she's gone. But then come morning, she's back in bed." "Man," said the friend, "I think you married a boo-hag." This was not good news. A boo-hag is a type of witch that can slip out of her skin and fly around at night wreaking havoc. Boo-hags are known to kill by sucking all of the blood from their victim's body through their nose. They'll sit on their victim's chest so they can't move or breathe. Horrified, the man asked his friend what he should do. "You've got to wait until she slips out of her skin in the middle of the night, and then you find that skin. Look under the stairs. That's where boo-hags like to hide their skins. You take that skin and you pour salt and pepper all over it. Then she won't be able to get her skin back on." That night, the man went to bed with his wife and pretended to sleep. At about midnight, he felt her slip out of bed beside him. He waited for her to get downstairs and then got out of bed and quietly hid where he could see her. He watched his wife pull off all of her skin, roll it up into a ball, and hide it under the stairs. Then she flew right up the chimney, going out into the world to wreak havoc. Wasting no time, he got his wife's skin, salted and peppered it really good, then rolled it back up into a ball and put it back under the stairs where he found it. Then he went back to bed and waited until morning, when he heard a noise in the chimney and his wife's voice speaking softly. "Skin, skin, you know me. Skin, skin, this is me. Skin, skin, you know me. Skin, skin, this is me." Knowing his wife couldn't get back into her skin with all that salt and pepper, he waited, hearing his wife speak again. "Skin, skin, you know me. Skin, skin, this is me. Skin, skin, you know me. Skin, skin, this is me." Knowing she was stuck without her skin, he heard her coming up the stairs and pretended to be asleep. He could feel his wife crawl into bed with him and wrap herself up really tightly in the sheet. He reached his hand over and could feel something warm and raw and rubbery in the bed next to him. When morning came, the man got up and said to his wife, "Time to get up, time for breakfast." But she refused to get up, claiming to be feeling sick, still wrapped tightly in the sheet, not showing 1 inch of herself. She also refused the man's offer to call the doctor, saying it cost too much money. So the man said he was going outside to work in the garden. He went outside and hid under the window. Soon he heard his wife come down the stairs and call out again. "Skin, skin, you know me. Skin, skin, this is me. Skin, skin, you know me. Skin, skin, this is me." At this point, the man went to fetch the conjure man, or hoodoo root worker, who'd surely know what to do. He told the conjure man his story. The conjure man advised him to go home and start a big barrel of pitch boiling, and he'd be along shortly. The man went home, built a fire in the garden, and started a big barrel of pitch boiling on it. When the conjure man arrived, the two of them went upstairs to the bedroom, where the man's wife was back in bed, wrapped tightly in her sheet. The conjure man asked, "What ails you, woman?" The wife answered that nothing was wrong. The conjure man ripped the sheet from her body and found her lying there all raw and bloody. The conjure man yelled, "Man, you done married a hag." He grabbed the woman, carried her out to the garden, threw her in the big barrel of boiling pitch, and burned the hag alive. That seems harsh, but I'm not sure what else they could have done, really. A boo hag is basically a specific form of haint, also from Gullah folklore. If you've ever heard of old hag syndrome, a phenomenon common with sleep paralysis, this may sound really familiar to you. In old hag syndrome, which is really just another name for sleep paralysis, it's believed that an old hag immobilizes a person by sitting on or riding their chest as they're waking up, rendering them unable to move. Boo hags are known as red, skinless monsters that hide in the skin of their victims during the day and shed it at night to go riding. They sneak into bedrooms at night and sit on your chest and steal your breath, leaving their victims weak, sick, and scared night after night. They're considered a form of vampire, draining their victims' energy. According to tradition, aside from apparently boiling them alive in tar, one of the best ways to keep a boo hag out of your house is to lay a broom across your front door. Like other types of haints, a boo hag can even slip in through a keyhole, but if she sees a broom, she has to stop and count every straw. This will ideally keep her out of her skin until dawn, and because a boo hag is thought to be a haint, the use of haint blue paint will usually work on them too. Big Liz was a very large and unbelievably strong slave woman who lived during the early days of the American Civil War, at least according to legend. She was so powerful that she could carry 2 full-grown pigs to slaughter, one under each arm, all by herself. She's said to have lived in the lowlands of Dorchester County, Maryland, near Greenbrier Swamp, owned by a Confederate fundraiser and owner of a Bucktown tobacco plantation named John Rustin. During the Civil War, some plantation slaves were used as spies by the Union Army, and it's said that Big Liz may have been one of those spies, considering her master's shipments of provisions and gold for the Confederate Army were repeatedly seized by Union troops on their way to the South. Whether the allegations were true or not, it wasn't long before Big Liz's master suspected her of being a Yankee spy. Since he was physically afraid of her due to her large size and exceptional strength, and equally afraid that she'd tell where he hid his treasure trove, he decided he had to do away with her. One evening, Rustin had Big Liz carry his heavy chest of gold to a desolate corner of Greenbrier Swamp, and ordered her to dig a deep hole so he could bury his treasure there. After hours of digging, Big Liz was completely exhausted. Just as she was finishing the job, Rustin snuck up behind her and beheaded her with one mighty swipe of his foot-long tobacco knife. He hastily buried Big Liz's body in the swamp, all but her head, which is said to have rolled away in the darkness. After this, the stories vary, with some saying Rustin lived the remainder of his days as an embittered and haunted old man, never daring to enter the swamp again. Others claim Big Liz's vengeful spirit immediately came back to haunt Rustin and scared him to death the very night of her murder. To this day, they say on the anniversary of her death, Big Liz can be seen roaming the swampy land of her old plantation. But you don't have to wait until then. There's a ritual for conjuring Big Liz's spirit. Reportedly, you just have to drive into the swamp and park on the DeCourcy Bridge, which crosses the Transquaking River, honk 6 times or possibly 3 times while flashing your headlights at the same time, and shout Big Liz's name 3 times, then wait. Then your car will no longer start, and Big Liz's ghost will appear, some say holding her head in her hands. It's also said that if you're brave enough to follow Big Liz's ghost, she'll lead you through the trees and mud to old Master Rustin's hidden treasure. But nobody's ever dared to do that, because the legend also states that Big Liz would never allow anyone to take the gold away from her that cost her her life. This story was written by Veronica Bird, and I can't tell it as well as she does, but it's a great introduction to the Plat-Eye legend, so I wanted to share it. I'll put a link to Ms. Bird's reading in the description. Nellie Bell and Jean LaRue were sisters. Besides being sisters, they were the best of friends. Now each girl had other friends, but they enjoyed each other's company more than anyone else. One of their favorite things to do during the hot South Georgia summer months was to go swimming down at the old swimming hole and pick scuppernongs along the way. For those of you who weren't fortunate enough to grow up around here, scuppernongs are large yellowish-green seeded grapes that grow down here in the South. Well, it happened on one of those hot and humid days that the girls could not cool off for anything. They tried going down to the well and splashing their faces with cool water, eating little chips of ice, and they even tried standing in front of the small oscillating fan that their mama kept in the living room window, but nothing worked. That was when they both decided that the only way to cool off was to go down to the swimming hole. That's when their adventure began. Nellie, who was the oldest, put on her pink swimsuit with purple polka dots, and Jean, the more practical of the two, her basic blue with red trim. The girls quietly closed the door to their bedroom, tiptoed to the kitchen, got their pails from the shelf under the sink, and oh so quietly made their way to the back door. You see, they were trying to stay as quiet as possible, so as not to awaken Grandma Matilda, who had a room in the back of the house. Just as Jean put her hand on the doorknob and turned it, "Jean, Nellie, you all trying to sneak past me? Come here, I got something to tell you before you go." The girls looked at each other, and with a sigh of disgust they shuffled towards Grandma Matilda's room, for they knew that they were in store for the usual lecture. "Y'all stick together, don't wander too far off the road, you might get lost," she'd say. Or, "Don't let darkness catch you on that old dirt road, make sure you're back before nightfall." Or her all-time favorite, "Stay out of the Gongetcha woods at all costs, strange things are known to happen in those woods." But on this particular day, Matilda, that's what the girls called her, seemed even more eager to give the girls their usual lecture. She sat them both down on her bed and looked them straight in the eyes and said the strangest thing. "If you hear a chain rattling on a tree nearby, be careful, 'cause it might just be a Plat-Eye." Then she reached into her pocket and pulled out 2 smelly little pieces of burlap, each tied into a tight knot. She handed each girl a bundle and told them, "Keep this with you at all times today. Make sure it's always in your pocket no matter what happens." The girls took the bags out of respect for their grandma, gave her a kiss, and bounded out of the room. But before they could clear the doorway, she blurted out, "And make sure you stay out of those Gongetcha woods. Strange things have been known to happen there." Once the girls were out of Matilda's earshot, they laughed and giggled about the silly things their grandma had told them. They thought it was awful strange, her telling them to carry those smelly little bags in their pockets, and rambling on and on about chains, trees, Plat-Eyes, whatever they were, and the Gongetcha woods. But they dismissed it as the babbling of a half-senile old woman. They grabbed their towels, dropped the burlap bags on the table, and headed for the ever-beckoning coolness of the swimming hole. As they walked along the winding, dusty road toward the swimming hole, they picked scuppernongs, admired all the beautiful wildflowers, and talked about how much fun they were going to have at the church picnic on Sunday. The 20-minute walk seemed to take no time at all, and before they knew it, they were there, the swimming hole. They dropped their towels and pails and jumped straight into the water, what they'd been waiting for all day. They were finally cool. The girls splashed around and played in the water for hours. They played so much that they were exhausted, so they got out of the water, ate a few scuppernongs, talked a bit, and before they knew it, they had both drifted off to sleep. Jean was the first to awaken. Once she realized where she was, she looked around and saw the sun was setting, and the warm summer day was giving way to the coolness of evening. She quickly awakened her sister. They grabbed their towels and pails and started back down the ever-darkening, winding dirt road. They'd walked about 5 minutes when Nellie remembered what Matilda had said. "Don't let darkness catch you on that dirt road. Make sure you're home before nightfall." There was no way they'd make it back before nightfall if they kept on the dirt road. Nellie had an idea. "Jean, let's cut through these woods. That way we'll be sure to get home way before dark, so we won't have to listen to one of Matilda's silly old lectures." Like I told you, Jean was the more practical of the two. "We can't go through those woods, we might get lost. Besides, those are the Gongetcha woods that Matilda warned us not to go into." "Don't be silly," Nellie protested. "Matilda just made that up to scare us. Ain't no such thing as the Gongetcha woods. Come on, girl." Well, with nothing more than getting home before dark on their minds, they started through the woods. At first, the path through the trees was quite visible, but the deeper they got into the woods, the denser the leaves on the trees became, making it harder to see where they were going. Jean was really having second thoughts about the shortcut. She wanted to turn around and go back down the dirt road, but once again Nellie quickly convinced her little sister that through the woods was indeed the fastest way. The girls made their way as best they could through the barrage of tangled weeds and vines toward what they thought was home. They were doing just fine until they heard an unusual noise coming from behind them, or was it in front of them? They really couldn't tell. They stopped, and so did the noise, so they continued on. But there it was again. "What is that? I've never heard anything like that before," Nellie whispered. And as if to answer her question, a large black cat jumped out right in front of them. This put both of their minds at ease, for there was nothing at all scary about a cat. Nellie and Jean walked up to the cat to pet him, when they let out a loud scream. For you see, the closer they got to the cat, they saw that it had 2 front legs, but it had 4 back legs, and its eyes glowed in the dark. What in the world? There was that strange sound again. What was that, and where was it coming from? The girls gave each other that look, and there was no need for words. They both knew that they needed to go back to the dirt road and take the long way home. They turned around and tried to figure out which way was out. Everything looked the same. They weren't sure which way they had come from. Jean grabbed her sister's hand, and they darted as fast as they could to where they thought was the way out of the woods. The occasional eerie beams of what was now moonlight streaming through the leaves of the trees confused the girls even more. They were moving as fast as they could when they heard the sound again. "What's that?" Nellie said. "Let's get out of here." They had only taken a few steps when they saw a large, shadowy figure in front of them. They turned on their heels and started away from the ominous thing, but there seemed to be shadowy things everywhere they looked. As if out of nowhere, a large dog with wiry hair and big bloodshot eyes walked directly in front of them. He had a hole in his side exposing all of his innards, which dragged along the ground as he walked. The girls let out a blood-curdling scream. The dog screamed back, mimicking their voices. The girls were completely beside themselves with fear by this point. They knew if they could make it back to the dirt road, they could at least see where they were going. They were blindly running in who knows what direction, when that odd sound seemed to be coming from everywhere. It sounds like a chain or something, like a chain rattling against a tree. At that moment, they remembered what Matilda had told them before they left. If you hear a chain rattling on a tree nearby, be careful, 'cause it just may be a Plat-Eye. They didn't know what a Plat-Eye was, and after seeing that dog and cat, they weren't sticking around to find out. They ran blindly in one direction and then another, the sound growing louder and louder with every step. It seemed to be all around them. They thought they were almost out of the woods when there was an awful stench that permeated the entire area, and floating down through the trees was what appeared to be a large hunchback hog, both eyeballs hanging from their sockets, dripping blood on the girls and making the most horrifying noise. Nellie and Jean screamed as loud as they could and instinctively ran in the same direction. They ran as fast as they could until they made it back to the dirt road. Once on the road, they could see exactly where they were going, but this was no reason for them to slow down. Nellie and Jean ran all the way home as fast as they could. They didn't stop until they collapsed, exhausted, on their front porch. When they caught their breath, they looked up, and standing in front of them with arms folded was Matilda. Best they could, they tried to tell her about all the spooky things they'd seen while they were in the woods. Matilda let the girls finish telling of their adventure. Then she calmly pulled out the small burlap bags from her pocket and told them how they could have avoided seeing all of this if they had obeyed her and carried those bags with them. For you see, the bags contained sulfur and gunpowder, a surefire way to ward off Plat-Eyes. Matilda has long gone on to meet her maker, but from that day till this, my sister and I make sure that we always carry a small burlap bag filled with sulfur and gunpowder in our pocketbooks, just in case there are any Plat-Eyes hiding out in these modern-day woods. Oh, I forgot to tell you, my name is Nellie Bell. It was my sister Jean and I that learned this lesson firsthand, and oh, what a lesson it was. So next time you dismiss those things your elders tell you is just mumblings of silly old folks, you'd better think again. Sometimes old folks know what they're talking about. And don't forget, stay out of those gone-get-you woods at night. Strange things have been known to happen there. The Plat-Eye is another legend from the Gullah community. It's known as a monster or boogeyman that serves as a warning to children to stay away from the woods after dark. They're described as shapeshifters, and while in human form they only have one eye, while in other forms they often have large glowing eyes. They originally were described as having one eye that dangled from the center of the forehead. Plat-Eyes are said to torment and haunt wandering victims to drive them insane and steal away misbehaving kids to eat. But it's also said that sometimes when you see one, it means you're close to hidden Confederate treasure. They're sometimes depicted as a phantom that hasn't been properly buried, bound to a particular place as a guardian for things like buried treasure. Plat-Eye stories became especially prevalent after the Civil War, with the rumors that plantation owners had buried their Confederate money to hide it from the Union Army. In some of those stories, the slave was said to be beheaded and buried with the treasure. Their restless spirit would then become the treasure's guardian. So in some ways, as I'm sure you've noticed, the Plat-Eye legend is very similar to the story of Big Liz. And we also can't overlook the fact that Black culture started some of the original zombie legends, one of the most prevalent creatures of the horror genre. The word zombie is believed to have a West African origin, and there are hoodoo and rootwork tales that speak of witches and shamans who were so powerful they could kill their enemies and then resurrect them as brainless, bloodthirsty servants. Zombie folklore has been around since the 17th century in Haiti and is believed to have arrived there with West African slaves brought in to work on sugarcane plantations. One belief is that early Haitian zombie lore actually represented the horrific reality of slavery, and since the only escape from that reality was death, the fear of becoming a zombie in the afterlife, an eternal slave, probably dissuaded some enslaved people from ending their own lives. And maybe that's part of the reason so many talented Black actors, directors, creators, and storytellers haven't received the opportunities or recognition they deserve in the horror genre. Perhaps the complex history and lore that they may pull their particular brand of horror from makes people uncomfortable. If we don't even want to face the basic facts of our not-so-distant history head-on, we're not ready to unpack the horrors that history has generated over centuries of oppression, injustice, and horrific atrocities. But that just sounds a lot like racism to me. That's all I have for you today. I hope you've enjoyed these stories and will come back for more. Like, subscribe, leave a comment, and bring your friends, family, COVIDpod, cult members, invisible friends, or enemies. And if you have any favorite horror channels by Black creators here on YouTube, or any favorite folklore, tell me about them in the comments below. Thanks so much for watching.